most people on the Naval Amphibious Base barely noticed the man who arrived before sunrise and stayed long after the last recruit dragged himself to bed. To them, he was just Gene Randall, the quiet janitor who pushed a mop down the hallway every morning at 5, shoulders hunched, hood pulled low, moving like someone who hoped the world would forget he existed. He always wore the same battered gray hoodie, sleeves shoved up to his elbows, the hem frayed from years of use. Even in the blistering California summer, he kept the hood over his head as if it were a shield he'd learned to live beneath. No one thought twice about him. Some of the recruits cracked jokes, calling him Silent Gene or Hoodie Grandpa. Others whispered he might be doing court-ordered community service. But the truth was simpler. No one knew anything about him. Not the instructors. Not the admin staff. Not even the guys who had worked at the base for years. He had been there longer than most of them had worn a uniform, yet he remained a ghost, present, but unseen. Except for one thing. If you caught Gene at the wrong angle, when he stretched his arm or wiped sweat with the edge of his sleeve, you could glimpse a patch of black ink at the base of his neck. Not a pretty tattoo. Not a sailor girl or an anchor. It looked like a winged skull wrapped in some kind of twisted cord, its edges faded like an old burn. It wasn't the kind of design you picked up in a weekend parlor. It felt significant. And old. And dangerous. But no one ever asked. Gene barely spoke. His vocabulary seemed limited to, "Watch your step. You drop that. This door sticks." Nothing more, nothing less. Chief Morales once joked during lunch. Guy must have been born with a mop in his hand and a secret in his pocket. Most of the instructors laughed. Lieutenant Beck didn't. He stared out the window where Gene was sweeping the patio and said quietly, "You ever notice how he walks? Like he's already lived through the whole damn war and is bored watching the rest of us catch up." For a second, everyone at the table felt it, that strange, heavy aura surrounding Gene. A man shaped by something nobody could name. Then the feeling passed, and they went back to their trays. But one recruit wouldn't let it go. Tyler Mendez, a determined 19-year-old trying to survive the psychological hurricane of SEAL training, didn't pay attention to Gene at first. Tyler had grown up in a dusty Central Valley town where no one expected much of him, and he had bigger worries than a quiet old janitor. Hell Week alone was enough to break most men, and he was barely hanging on. Until one blistering morning at PT. Tyler was halfway through an endless set of push-ups when Gene tipped a trash can to empty it, and the neckline of his hoodie slipped just a fraction lower than usual. Tyler froze. There it was. That tattoo. The curve of the skull. The broken wings. Faded, but unmistakable. Tyler's pulse spiked. Because he had seen it before. When he was 12, he sat cross-legged on his Uncle Ramon's floor as the older man, 3 beers deep, dug out a dusty shoebox from beneath his bed. Inside were old maps, worn patches, and a single blurred Polaroid. 5 men in dark gear. No names. No insignias. No explanation. And one of them had that exact tattoo on his neck. When Tyler asked, Ramon ripped the photo away and muttered, "You didn't see that. These guys? They never existed. Somalia swallowed half of them. The ones who lived didn't come home, they went off the grid. Erased." Tyler never forgot that tone. Not fear. Not pride. A kind of haunted respect. Now that same tattoo was here, on a janitor. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be coincidence. From that moment, Tyler watched Gene differently. The way he scanned a room without looking like he was scanning it, how he moved with quiet purpose, how his footsteps were so soft they barely registered. Tyler whispered to another recruit about it. He was laughed off. He told a second. Brushed aside. He even asked Sergeant Pike, who rolled his eyes so hard it nearly hurt. But the more people dismissed him, the more certain Tyler became. There was something buried under that hoodie, something big. And soon, Tyler's curiosity would take him somewhere he was never meant to go. The next few mornings, Tyler couldn't stop himself from keeping an eye on Gene. Every subtle movement, every shuffle down the hall, drew his attention. Gene didn't notice him. He moved like someone whose life had already unfolded in full, every action precise, every step deliberate. During gear checks, Tyler's eyes tracked him, silently noting how effortlessly Gene handled crates, how he seemed to anticipate obstacles before they appeared. Not a janitor's clumsiness. Not even a hint of ordinary fatigue. Something else entirely. Tyler confided in a fellow recruit, Brandon Kehoe, during lunch. "You ever notice Gene's tattoo?" Tyler asked, careful to keep his voice low. Brandon shrugged. "What? The janitor? Man, you're losing it." Tyler shook his head. "No, I've seen it before. On a photo my uncle showed me years ago." Brandon laughed. "You're kidding. It's just a dude sweeping floors, man. Chill." Tyler didn't laugh. Something about Gene wasn't ordinary. The movement, the aura, the way he existed quietly, it didn't belong to a simple janitor. Later, he cornered Sergeant Lomer. "How long has Gene been here?" he asked. Lomer blinked. "Gene? I dunno. Maintenance contract, I guess. Longer than I've been around." Tyler pressed, but Lomer waved it off. "Focus on your training, kid. Some guys just have tattoos they regret. Don't overthink it." Tyler didn't buy it. Not a chance. There was something buried under that gray hoodie. Something that didn't want to be found. By the end of the second week, Tyler's curiosity had become obsession. He wasn't skipping drills. He didn't slack on runs or push-ups. But his thoughts always drifted to Gene. Every shadow he cast. Every silent movement. Every glimpse of that faded skull tattoo. Finally, one morning, Tyler decided to confront him. He waited by the staff parking lot, pretending to tie his boots while Gene moved water jugs from a golf cart to the supply shed. "Gene?" Tyler started. No response. "Gene, sir? I mean, just a second." Still nothing. He cleared his throat. "I saw your tattoo. My uncle showed me a picture once. Said it belonged to a team that didn't exist anymore." Gene froze mid-step. His back remained turned, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Slowly, he set the jug down and turned to face Tyler. Close up, he looked older than Tyler had imagined. Lines etched around his eyes, skin weathered and toughened. His gaze was steady, calculating, a man who had already measured every risk and outcome. "You got family in the Navy?" Gene asked quietly. "My uncle, Ramon. He was Naval Intelligence," Tyler replied. Gene exhaled. "And he showed you that picture?" "Yeah." A long pause. Then Gene stepped closer. Voice lowered. "Listen, kid. I'm not who you think I am. Forget what your uncle told you. Some things are better buried. People died so it stayed buried." Tyler's instincts screamed to ask more, but Gene's tone, not angry, not afraid, just heavy, held him still. "You're here. Alive. Sweeping floors. That's not the end of your story, is it?" Tyler ventured. Gene's eyes hardened. "My story ended long ago. What you're chasing doesn't exist. Not in records. Not in history. And if you're smart, you'll leave it that way." Tyler wanted to argue. But the weariness in Gene's voice made him pause. "You're going to make it through this place? Then stop asking questions you're not ready to answer," Gene said, turning and moving on as if nothing had happened. Tyler stood, heart hammering, unsure if he'd just been warned or spared. But one thing was certain. His curiosity had set him on a path he could not abandon. By Saturday, Tyler couldn't stop thinking. Most recruits used their free hours to sleep or hit town, but he had a different plan. He took a bus 30 minutes inland to El Cajon, searching for a bar his uncle Ramon had mentioned years ago, the Brass Shield. A dusty, almost forgotten place tucked into an industrial strip. The kind of hole in the wall that collected old soldiers and never bothered with appearances. Inside, Tyler saw only the bartender and two older men playing cards. He slid onto a stool. Ordered a root beer, letting the silence stretch. After a while, he turned to the bartender. I'm looking for someone. Served in naval special warfare back in the early 90s. Maybe part of off-books teams. The bartender paused. You a reporter? No, sir. Recruit. SEAL training. One of the card players grunted, eyeing him. You don't look like a frogman yet. I'm not, Tyler admitted. I just have a question about someone. The older man, scar across his cheek, shifted uneasily. Looking for ghosts, kid? Tyler nodded cautiously. Maybe. But someone has to remember them. The name? The man asked. Eugene Randall. The room froze. Even the bartender stopped wiping the counter. Gene? The scarred man said slowly. You mean the janitor at your facility? Yes. But he's got a tattoo I've seen before, Tyler explained. My uncle showed me a photo years ago. Said it was a team that shouldn't exist. The older man exhaled. Your uncle's name? Ramon Mendez. Naval Intel. Discharged 97. A long silence followed. The man finally spoke. Damn. Haven't heard that name in years. Tyler leaned in. So you knew him? One of the few who asked questions. Probably why they pushed him out, the man replied. Tyler pressed. Why? What happened? Gene was part of a unit that didn't exist. Jobs off the books. Somalia, early 90s. Things went south. Most didn't come home. Those who did became ghosts. Politics, bad optics. Saved lives, but the brass wanted it buried. Easier to pretend it never happened than admit they sent good men to die. Tyler swallowed hard. And Gene just disappeared. From records, not the world, the man said. A few of us knew he walked off the grid. Trusted no one. Not even his family. Tyler hesitated. Why come back to the Navy? Even as a janitor? Some men never leave completely, the man said. This life gets in your blood, even when it betrays you. The man stood, tossing a few bills on the table. You found something real, kid. But real comes with consequences. Gene didn't ask to be remembered. And if you keep pulling at this thread, make sure you're ready for what unravels. Tyler left, heart pounding. Back on base, nothing seemed different. But for him, everything had changed. Gene was no longer a janitor with a mop. He was a man who had endured unimaginable missions, forced into silence by a system that erased him. Tyler couldn't unsee it. The drills were still brutal. The instructors sharp. The blisters raw. But Tyler carried a new weight, the knowledge of the man behind the hoodie. And now, curiosity burned hotter than any PT session. Back at the base, Tyler tried to focus on drills, push-ups, and obstacle courses. But nothing could erase what he'd learned in El Cajon. Every time he saw Gene sweeping or moving silently across the compound, the image of the man behind the janitor's facade gnawed at him. That Tuesday morning, during breakfast, one of the louder recruits, Deshaun Bell, decided to joke. Hey Gene! He called from across the mess hall. You miss a spot? Gene didn't respond. He kept wiping. Bell leaned in, grinning. Come on, man. You were probably Navy once, right? Dropped your rifle and got demoted to mop duty? A few snickers followed, but Tyler stood up. Cut it out, he said, calm but firm. Bell scoffed. What's your deal, Mendez? You got a thing for janitors now? You don't know who he is, Tyler replied. The room went quiet. Gene didn't flinch. He picked up his tray and walked past, giving Tyler a brief, unreadable glance. After that, whispers spread among the recruits. Small nods, quiet acknowledgments, a subtle respect forming for the man they all ignored. Tyler noticed Diego Suarez approach him later. About what you said at breakfast, you weren't joking, were you? Diego asked. Tyler shook his head. No. Diego nodded slowly. Maybe some people shouldn't mouth off to guys who've been through more than we can imagine. By Friday, the atmosphere at the base had shifted. Everyone felt it, an unspoken tension, a recognition of something beyond uniforms and ranks. That evening, Tyler found Gene alone in the gear room, restocking supplies. He leaned against the doorframe. "You told me to let it go," Tyler began. "I didn't." Gene didn't look up. "I talked to someone in El Cajon," Tyler continued. "He said you were part of something, erased." Gene stopped, finally meeting his eyes. "You went digging?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah. I had to." Gene's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "What they did, it wasn't right," Tyler said. Gene took a step closer, voice dropping. "Justice? Out here? You think someone hands out medals for what got buried 30 years ago? No. But silence is freedom," Tyler pressed. "Then why are you here? Why not disappear completely?" "Because," Gene admitted, "there's a part of me that wanted to see who would notice. And you did." The weight of his words hung in the room. Tyler understood. He wasn't just seeing a janitor. He was witnessing a man who had survived impossible missions, erased from history, carrying a burden that few could comprehend. Gene finally gestured toward the diner where they had agreed to meet. "You want to hear the full story? This is where it starts. Quiet, out of sight, where nobody from command ever shows up." Tyler's palms sweated as he followed him. Every step felt heavy, filled with anticipation. Seated in the back corner, Gene stirred his coffee, eyes sharp. "You ask dumb questions, I walk out," he said. Tyler nodded. "Fair enough." And then, for the first time, Gene began to speak, about Team 9, missions that never existed on paper, the operations in Somalia, the extraction of hostages, the men lost, and the erasure of their existence. Names removed. Medals denied. Threats issued. Lives shattered. By the time he finished, Tyler's world had shifted completely. Gene wasn't a janitor. He was a ghost of history, a man forced to vanish, yet still moving among them. Tyler finally understood. Respect wasn't given because of rank or skill. It was earned through survival, silence, and the choices that most people could never imagine. When Gene stood to leave, he placed a few bills on the table. His eyes met Tyler's. "Being remembered for the wrong things, that's the real danger. Keep that in mind." Tyler sat there, heart pounding, knowing the truth now. It was bigger than training, bigger than any story he'd heard. And once a truth leaves one mouth, it never stays small. By Monday morning, the weight of what Tyler had learned was already settling in. He hadn't told everyone, only a few trusted recruits, the ones who didn't gossip or seek attention. But even quiet truths have a way of spreading. Tyler kept his head down during PT, drills, and endurance runs. He didn't speak much. But the energy around him had changed. A subtle tension moved through the barracks, an almost imperceptible shift in how recruits looked at Gene. Some were skeptical. "Sounds like a war movie," they whispered. Others didn't need convincing. They caught the small gestures, the careful way Gene moved, the authority and silence that no rank could command. Tyler noticed it first during breakfast the following Tuesday. Gene was cleaning trays at a side station, methodical as ever. One recruit, Diego Suarez, leaned closer to Tyler. "About what you said, you really mean it?" Diego asked quietly. Tyler nodded. "Yeah. The man's seen more than we can even imagine." Diego glanced toward Gene. "You think others will notice?" Tyler shrugged. "Some already have. The ones paying attention. That's enough for now." Throughout the week, small gestures spread. A nod of acknowledgement here. A quiet step aside there. Recruits who once ignored Gene now gave him so respect, even if they didn't speak of it aloud. Bell, the loudmouth from breakfast, kept his distance. Tyler noticed the shift. The recruits were watching, learning, internalizing. The story of Gene, the man behind the janitor, was sinking in. Tyler felt the responsibility settle on his shoulders. He couldn't tell the full story. Not yet. But he could make sure the respect for the man endured. Every time he saw Gene sweep the far end of the compound, Tyler's thoughts spun. Not about drills. Not about push-ups. Not about Hell Week. but about the truth of who Gene was, and the weight he carried silently every day. It was no longer just curiosity. It was an understanding, a respect, a quiet acknowledgement that some lives are lived in shadows, yet their impact ripples far beyond what anyone sees. By the end of the week, even the instructors noticed the subtle shift. Recruits moved differently, walked with purpose, glanced at the janitor with a mixture of awe and caution. And Tyler knew, the secret wasn't just his anymore. The truth of Gene Randall, the man, the ghost, the hero erased from history, was out. Not for the world to see, but for those who mattered, for those who would remember correctly. In the silence of early morning PT, with the sun barely cresting the hills, Tyler caught a glimpse of Gene. Hood pulled low, mop in hand, but somehow, the entire base felt a little different. Respect had been earned quietly, by a man who didn't ask for it. And Tyler knew that the story had only begun to awaken. Weeks passed, and life at the base carried on. The drills remained grueling, the instructors sharp, and the blisters still raw. But Tyler felt a shift within himself. What he had learned about Gene was more than just a secret. It was a lesson in resilience, humility, and unseen courage. He no longer measured his worth by push-up counts or timed runs alone. Instead, he thought about presence, vigilance, and respect. About how a man who could command rooms and shape missions chose silence over glory, and what that meant for the rest of them. Tyler watched his fellow recruits differently too. He noticed their small gestures of awareness toward Gene, their quiet nods of acknowledgement, and their subtle restraint. The ripple effect of one man's past had begun to reshape the culture of the barracks, even if only slightly. And then there was Gene. Still silent. Still methodical. Still moving through the base with the same careful steps, the frayed hoodie shielding him from the world. But now, Tyler understood him. And understanding, Tyler realized, was the truest form of respect. One evening, after the last lights went out, Tyler sat on his bunk and replayed the conversations in his mind. The warnings, the confessions, the weight of erased missions, lost comrades, and lives abandoned to secrecy. He realized that history isn't just written in medals and parades. Sometimes, it lives quietly in the shadows, in the people who endured the unendurable and chose to walk on unnoticed. Tyler felt a quiet pride. Not for himself, but for the man who taught him without speaking. The man who had survived the unspeakable and chosen to protect those who didn't yet know they needed protection. In that moment, Tyler made a silent vow to carry forward the lessons of respect, vigilance, and courage. Not for fame. Not for recognition. But for the truth, and for the memory of those who lived, and sometimes died, in the shadows. Gene continued to sweep the hallways each morning, unassuming, silent, a ghost among the living. But for Tyler, and now a few others who had learned to notice, he was no longer invisible. He was remembered. And sometimes, that is enough.